Alright people, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. That way you'll know when I upload the next video and you'll be supporting my channel. Follow me on Twitter. Every time I upload a new video, I'll be tweeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, reaction. This is Conquest of India, East India Company's Extra History Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. Yes, the first part was surprising for me. I didn't know there was that kind of a difference. I always thought that in the Indian conquest it's usually been obviously the empire hasn't been one gigantic empire. There have been multiple empires that are fighting each other, so it was much easier for British to conquer, and British were much technologically advanced. I didn't know India had guns and shit like that, guns and cannons. So this is really surprising. Even no video or channel I've come across who basically has said that. So yeah. Bombay, April 1619, the British were cowering in a small fort on the coast of India as the Mughal Empire weakened the British. How did the British Empire get from this loss to their paradoxical conquest of India? Find out in the next installments. Okay. So basically, I think Marathas and all the other empire is gonna come in this series basically by the end, right? And they are going to fight Mughal Empire, and empire is going to fight each other. That will weaken them, and British will just take them apart one by one. That's the only thing that makes sense. Divide and conquer strategy. They'll use that basically.
Bombay, April 1619. The British, the future leaders of a global empire, the one-day masters of a domain upon which the sun never set, the soon-to-be rulers of millions of subjects, were cowering in a tiny fortified city on the coast of India. What remained of the East India Company in the subcontinent had been under siege in Bombay for almost a year and a half. Most of the company's garrison, along with a good number of civilians, were dead from enemy attacks, starvation, or bubonic plague. And who were the architects of this British embarrassment? Another great European power, perhaps? Maybe a resurgent Mongol empire? Nope. It was the Mughal Empire, using a collection of freelance Afro-Indian former slaves to absolutely wreck the British Empire in India. Oh yeah, we're a long way from the Raj, folks.
I mean, there is a saying basically in India that I heard for my whole life, that Mughals were basically got way too leisurely and lazy by the end. They were covered in their riches so much that they didn't realize that they are under attack at the major scale before they lost it all. There's a saying like that, so that kind of makes sense seeing this, because clearly Mughals were really rich compared to everybody else. They had many resources. They were living lavish lives, right? They had enough resources to attack people, right? Just using some kind of slaves or something just to attack people. So basically, from going from here to the losing to British, I guess they had so many riches that they got lost in it, I guess.
Thanks so much to World Anvil for helping us forge today's historical tale. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about the big historical paradox that is Britain's conquest of India. The thing is, on the way to reaching that big paradox, there's actually a lot of other smaller, though no less confusing paradoxes. The first of which in this long story involves the East India Company, which began operation in 1600. Now, if you've only heard about one early modern company, the East India Company is probably it, because the EIC is a key player in a lot of important events, including the American Revolution, and as a result, it's featured in a lot of historical fiction set in this period. For instance, like a surprisingly popular film franchise based on a pirate-themed amusement park ride. Barbossa stands what? Now, in the popular retellings of East India Company history, there's a lot of focus on the company's dealings in the Caribbean and America and England. But one key area of the company's work is usually left out, which is pretty weird when you think about it, because it's kind of right in the name. India. You see, the whole reason the EIC was founded to begin with was to establish trade with India, because the British wanted India's spices, silks, and textiles. But they weren't the only Europeans trying to grab Indian goods, and they most definitely were not the first. That honorific would go to the Portuguese. Their interest in India led to their famous exploration of the Cape of Good Hope at the end of the 15th century, where they reached India in 1498 to discover a sophisticated economy managed by the Mughal Empire. And as other Europeans would soon discover, this economy simply had no use for European trading goods. The best the Portuguese could manage were a small set of coastal trading stations, called factories, which were allowed to exist only with the permission of the regional Mughal leaders. Even so, by the mid-16th century, the Portuguese were the European power in the Indian Ocean, even though that power was still insignificant when compared to the Mughal Empire. And in order to extract any sort of wealth or commodities out of India, the Portuguese were forced to run up a huge trade deficit, trading the gold and silver transported from the New World in exchange for Indian goods. The situation wasn't much different for the Dutch, who began to push out the Portuguese by the end of the 1500s, improving on the Portuguese' situation through better organization. Because while the Portuguese relied on the guile and ability of individual traders to establish factories, the Dutch developed a corporation to create a more lasting and profitable foothold in the region.
Okay, hold on a minute, Buster. Why are we talking so much about the Dutch and the Portuguese? Wasn't this a story of the British East India Company?
Well, you see, Army, there's a common phrase historians have for talking about this period of history. Anything the British are famous for doing, the Dutch did first, and often better. Long before the Spanish Armada threatened England, Protestants in the Netherlands fended off wave after wave of attack from the Spanish Empire. Long before the English Civil War brought republicanism to Parliament, the Dutch Republic created a thriving state built around political and religious freedom. And long before the East India Company entered popular historical fiction, the United Dutch East India Company dominated the global trade in silks, spices, and textiles.
That is so true. There's things like this, you don't realize until you research it. Like Dutch were a kind of, the dominant power before the British at some point, right? Everything you can think of what British did, if you peel it away, you realize Dutch were there first.
More commonly referred to as the VOC, they combined several different East India companies into one large megacorporation. Because colonialism in this era was a high-risk, high-reward venture. Individual states could sponsor new colonies or trading opportunities, but if things went wrong, which they often did, the state could be bankrupt and ripe for conquest.
Holy shit,
See
yes.
Scotland in the Darien scheme. Colonial
That
company.
is so true, right? I mean, if you want to, play the colonialism game, but if you, basically go there and something goes wrong, some kind of plague comes out, at anything, any hurdle that basically disrupt trades or just cost money at the major scale, that's a domino effect. And usually the people who basically fund them, if they put way too much resources in that, they go bankrupt. It was always a gamble around that time.
However, offered states the opportunity to get involved in the age of discovery without taking on that type of risk. In other words, companies like the EIC or VOC were created for the exact same reason companies are created today. To take advantage of emerging opportunities, while also focusing on the two most important words in business: limit liability.
Seriously.
Nobles, merchants, bankers, and other investors in the early modern era could buy stocks in these types of companies in order to grab a share of lucrative international trade.
Yeah, I don't want to pause this much, but this is the philosophy everybody uses for space even today. I mean, I know SpaceX and companies like that, privatized companies trying to do some frontier work, which is surprising. That's not how things usually go, because frontiers are always risky. So usually government funded money that does things like that. But yeah, that is so true. Look at the history. East India Company, VOC, like he said, all right, Dutch and everybody. Basically, did exploration of their own. Then realize, okay, let's, make this more of a corporate venture or anything. So let's just make companies and people can invest in it. Make it people's thing. They take the risk. They can make profit. If they don't make profit, then there you go. It's their risk. And country don't go bankrupt. That's why the companies existed. When you're a kid, when you hear that, right? When you realize that certain countries, colonize certain place, then you realize, oh, it was East India Company. And there's always this word, a company, like, what the fuck? Why is companies doing this? But then later you realize that this is how business is done, right? In any sector. If you want something to, sometime you want somebody to do something first, right? Then it's usually a country doing something, which is miraculous. It goes in the paper, like, okay, Dutch basically did this, Portuguese did this, British did this. Oh, isn't that applaudable? Everybody does, clap and everything, shit like that. After a few months, there's a company that gets founded, because of course it does. Otherwise, the country would go bankrupt every time they take a risk. So this is the same shit that will happen to space, I guess. Somebody basically, some country or, joint effort of countries basically will do something in the space, frontier work, right? Then eventually there will be companies like East India Company, East India Company or whatever. The companies like that basically will, like SpaceX basically will, privatize the sector, right, of space. Because there's already history of that happening in basically here, our planet.
Trade. And if things went wrong, they could lose a lot of money, sure, but they likely wouldn't be left penniless.
Yeah.
The VOC, however, didn't lose
A bit
much
of money.
and by the mid-17th century, they were the richest corporation in the world, maintaining an impressive military force that included 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, and 10,000 soldiers. Oh my gosh, please nobody tell Daddy Bezos this sort of thing has a historical precedent. In addition to trading
Seriously.
commodities, the VOC also offered
I think
their
Bezos know that. Bezos definitely know that. Bezos and Elon Musk, all of them basically knows that. Oh, East India Company, they did this Dutch. They had this kind of a major company. Company becomes empire pretty fast if it's successful. Let's just say. Basically, if you have too much resources, then you grow your manpower. You become your own thing, which is risky, and which will be even major scale risky in space, right? Because every movie has certain corporation becoming greed and creating their own world, and there's always a story like that.
their fleet and troops to local rulers in India and Indonesia to sweeten trade deals or to offer temporary support for regional wars. So, the VOC was a profit-making company, but wielded power like a state. So you know that darkest timeline dominated by transnational corporations that we fear will one day become a reality?
There you
Well,
go.
sadly, humanity has both been there and done that
Yeah.
long ago. So, given this
I love
strength,
history
why
for this
didn't the
reason.
Dutch
Holy
and the
shit.
VOC
See, this is why you should learn every sector. People basically watch this movie and they think, the road, wait a minute. What is the movie called? Right now I'm keep forgetting things. I even forgot the word frontier a moment ago. That's why I struggle saying that. That runner movie, right? The cyberpunk type of universe. Everybody basically sees that and sees that kind of a pattern that every movie basically takes, like, oh, far future, it's all corporation taking over. But if you learn history, like, basically like here, East India Company, all this company, you have a context, like why people create movies like that and why people think like that. Because there's already precedent. Somebody already did that in the past. This is why history is fucking awesome.
dominate India? Well, because they lost interest and focused on Indonesia instead. See, from the city of Jakarta, they could monopolize the greatest prize in the early modern era, the trade in Asian spices. India was worthwhile, no doubt, but the Mughal Empire's strength posed a significant barrier to the VOC's ability to extract wealth. Whereas in Indonesia, the Dutch could dominate trade while maintaining an easier relationship with the disparate kingdoms of the archipelago. So when the East India Company finally got its act together and established their own factories along the coast of India in the mid-1600s, they weren't so much competing with the VOC as taking the Dutch's leftovers, the tough, hard-to-eat leftovers. And when the British attempted to step out of line and introduce themselves into Indonesia, the Dutch retaliated swiftly and brutally. On Ambon Island in 1623, the Dutch rounded up and tortured a small group of EIC agents who had hired Japanese Ronin to spy on VOC positions on the island. After a
Damn.
forced confession, the leader of the EIC agents, Gabriel Towerson, was beheaded and had his head impaled on a pole as an example to other British traders considering the same thing. So, the situation with the Dutch
He's still Vlad.
meant that the British were left trying to pry money out of India, which could only be done based on trade agreements dictated by the Mughal state. And when the British balked at these agreements, as they did during the Anglo-Mughal War, they were once again swiftly and brutally dealt with by the Mughal Empire, as you saw with the Siege of Bombay from the beginning of this episode. Despite the EIC's resources and a collection of warships sent by the Crown to assist in the endeavor, the British were soundly defeated in this war and were temporarily expelled from their factories along the coast. And in order to gain readmittance to India, the EIC had to admit fault for the war, pay local Indian merchants for seized goods and ships, and hand over a huge indemnity of millions of dollars in today's money to the Mughal Empire for the inconvenience. And finally, in a true show of weakness, EIC representatives were forced to prostrate themselves on the floor and beg for forgiveness at the feet of Emperor Aurangzeb during a public ceremony. Ooh boy, pretty bad, huh? Well,
Aurangzeb.
don't forget to add to the mixture the French, who by the end of the 17th century had established their own factories on the coast of India. That's right, yet another bully was lining up to take a crack at the faltering British.
Okay, so why is this series called The Conquest of India? Doesn't really seem like that's happening, you know?
Don't worry, Army, we'll get there. I think. Oh man, I can't believe we invented...
No, this is seriously important because every time somebody thinks of conquest of India, every time they think of the British dominance and East India Company's dominance, like they just basically walked in and swooped the thing, like didn't break the sweat. This series is so good that basically shows you like that's a misconception. That's not how things worked. right? Anybody who basically have seen whatever mild form of history around this time, they would know that that was definitely not the case. But even then, there's still a misconception of how British were overpowering at the time, which was also not the case. Mughals were pretty much, overpowered force, right? I mean, British Navy is strong, obviously, but they were, on Indian land. It's not going to be easy going against the Mughals. But the saying here, like I said in the start of the video, that, Mughals got lazy and to, drown in their own riches. There's a saying like that here. I guess that now makes sense to me. Like, obviously. Because they had power to fight British, but they just basically squabbled and fought each other before British took over. That's what's going to happen here. Damn. I love history because, this video was also fucking awesome. That just shows you the precedence of different things, like how things happen. Basically a country does some frontier work, then basically different companies gets formed up, right? Some form of corporate type of venture where all the public basically gives their own money for the venture, just 20% of their savings or whatever, because there's so many people pitching in. Now you have a major funded thing, but even if it fails, the people and world don't go bankrupt. Otherwise, if the country would have done that, it would have been significant portion of the money that country has, and country would have gone bankrupt, like how it happened in many of the times, like fight between British America, British France. Every time somebody aided somebody, French aided America, but then America didn't help back in the end. French Revolution happened. Shit like that happens a lot when you invest in a venture by a country. Right, a country invests in some venture, it's a major risk, and the ripples are really bad if something goes bad at the time. So companies do that really good, because even if it go bust, people's 20% of money went away. They're not going to go bankrupt, and there you go, money lost. But country don't go bankrupt at least. Right, people, that was Conquest of India, East India Companies with the channel Extra Credits. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the card. Check out the link. Yeah, I'll see you next time.